Hiya. Okay, now let's get into how we might customize the hand-sized portion guides to suit various situations. Now, I hope you've been doing the hand-sized portion guides or the PN plate, and I hope you've been doing it consistently. And by now, you should really be up at least at the 80% mark. So you should be very familiar with how it works, how to structure a meal, how to set up your meals throughout the day. And you should also, if you've been doing the Hunger Games, like I say, be noticing whether the baseline guidelines are enough food for you or not. Okay, so let's start looking at how we can customize it based on where you're at. So we'll just recap the baseline guidelines. As you know, for men, it's 6 to 8 portions of protein a day, 6 to 8 portions of vegetables a day, 6 to 8 portions of fats a day, and 6 to 8 portions of carbs a day. For women, 4 to 6 protein, 4 to 6 vegetables, 4 to 6 fats, and 4 to 6 carbs. So those are the baseline guidelines. So now let's look at how you might change that according to your body type. Now you're probably very familiar with these three standard somatotypes. So you've got your ectomorphs, who are sort of long, lean-limbed people. They tend to be lightly framed, lightly muscled. They tend to have smaller bone structures. They're high energy, and they tend to tolerate carbs particularly well. So as a modification from the baseline, you might want to decrease your fat. So this is per meal, by the way. So for men, it would be 2 protein, 2 vegetables, 1 fat, but 3 carbs. For women, you would do 1 protein, 1 vegetables, half a fat, and 2 carbs. Okay, so the next body type is the mesomorph. Now these people tend to be sort of shorter, stockier, carry a lot more sort of lean muscle mass. Excess calories tend to go towards putting on muscle mass rather than fat. They're pretty much the standard, so they actually pretty much fit the base guidelines are pretty much aimed at a mesomorph. So really, if this is your kind of body type, then you wouldn't change anything. Now the last one is the endomorph. This body type, it tends to be a much sort of slower metabolism, say, compared to the ectomorph. The ectomorphs are just sort of high energy, fidgety, go all the time, whereas endomorphs tend to be much more, their metabolism could be said to be on idle. So excess calories tend to go more towards fat. They tend to have a higher body mass, but also a higher fat mass. Because endomorphs' metabolism tends to be a little bit slower, they don't tolerate carbs quite as well as somebody like the ectomorphic types. So the modification for if you're this type of body type would be to increase your fats by 1 portion per meal, but decrease your carbs. Okay, this one is much less carb tolerant. So the next thing we want to look at is activity levels. How would you modify the base guidelines for your activity levels? Well, if you're a very sedentary person and you don't do any sort of activity at all, you've got a sitting down kind of job, you don't go for walks, anything like that, you tend to be very, very inactive. Again, you really want to cut back on the carbs because this will tend to be stored as fat. Okay, so the protein, vegetables, and fats would be as per the base guidelines, but you would cut back on your carbs. All right. Now, if you are doing some sort of activity, just a moderate level of activity, then you'd pretty much stick to the base guidelines. If, however, you are doing a lot more intensive exercise, doesn't have to be weightlifting, but sort of endurance exercise, a lot of cycling, you're exercising for, say, an hour a day, for example, you would definitely need to increase your carbs. Carbs need to be earned, okay? You would increase them only on your first post-workout meal. So you'd stick to the base guidelines, but on your post-workout meal, whenever that is, you would increase your carbs by 1 portion size. And then you can also modify it depending on if you've got a particular weight goal. If you're losing weight, as we saw before with the sedentary person, you actually might want to cut back on the carbs. So you just reduce it by sort of 1 or half if you're a female. Now, some people actually might want to gain weight. Could be true of like your ectomorphic types particularly. And because they tolerate carbs so well, or if you are in a muscle building program and you are wanting to gain weight, again, you increase your carb intake by 1 portion per meal, because this will help with either weight gain or muscle building. So that's a very quick, very simple guide on how you can modify your food intake according to your weight goal, your body type, and your activity levels. Okay. This is a much more advanced strategy, so you should only attempt this if you've got the base guidelines down at least 80% consistency and preferably 90% consistency. If you can get to 90% consistency on the base guidelines, that is when you can start considering customizing it to whatever your particular goal is. I wouldn't recommend it until you can get to 90% consistency. Okay, you really need to understand it very, very well before you can start customizing it. Okay, this is a much more advanced strategy. And if you do decide to implement this, then the way that you monitor it is that you make a change to just one meal, and then you wait at least 2 weeks to see if that makes a difference. So let's say, for example, your goal was to lose weight. You would cut the carbs at one meal, give it 2 weeks, and see what your body's doing. Pay attention to how your body changes. If you lose weight, you just leave it as it is. If you're not losing weight, you would drop the carbs at another meal and you would give it 2 weeks. And if you're still not making any changes, you would drop it at another meal and you'd wait 2 weeks. And every time you wait 2 weeks, if the changes are occurring as you want to see them occur, you don't make any further changes. If you're not changing, you do make a change. Do you see what I mean? So you make one small adjustment at a time and you give it a chance to kick in before you do anything else. Okay? If you make lots of wholesale changes at the same time, you don't know what's working and what isn't working. So you keep it incredibly simple. You make one change at a time to one meal, give it 2 weeks to kick in, and then reassess. Always be asking yourself, is this working? Is this working? Is this working? Okay? And if it's not working, after 2 weeks, you can make another change. If it is working, you just keep going as you are. Okay? Give that a go, but only when you've got to at least 90% consistency. One thing I forgot to do, and I'm just going to add this in now, is show you what I do and how I have customized the hand-sized portion guide to my needs, being an elite athlete. You can see that it's somewhat different to the basic guidelines. I eat a ton of protein. I do love my protein, so that's absolutely no difficulty for me whatsoever. I absolutely load up on the green vegetables and the starchy vegetables because the volume of this is what keeps you full. I prioritize my good fats and I have just enough carbs, starchy carbs, to do the job which is geared towards muscle building. So I time my carbs carefully and I don't go overboard on them. This is how I manage to stay within 10% of stage weight year round. It's because I stack my whole eating plan towards the much leaner foods that have a higher thermic effect of foods. Remember that little tiny slice on the metabolic profile that was the thermic effect of foods? That's where I stack the most of my foods to ensure that's maximized and I still stay lean in the off season as well. And then when I'm cutting for competition, as it turns out, I hit 6% body fat last year, 2017, which is absolutely unheard of. And you can see that I don't change things overall too much in terms of, let me see, there's 31 portions there, 26, 28, 30 portions there. So in terms of portions, I don't change it too much, but what you can see is the big change is where I make the changes. So when I'm cutting for competition, the first thing I cut out is the carbs. Then I reduce the fats. To make up the gap in, I guess, space on a plate, I load up on the vegetables. And I, as far as possible, try not to reduce my protein too much because that is what A, helps burn the fat and B, helps me keep my muscle, which of course is important when I'm on stage. So I just thought I'd show you how I've customized it to my needs, being an elite athlete, and particularly in the bodybuilding space. Now, if you are an elite endurance sport athlete, such as a marathon runner, for example, you would probably have significantly more in the complex carbs zone. So you'd probably be meet the guidelines for your vegetables, and you'd probably really load up on the high carbs. And then when you come towards your competition, you'd load up on the carbs again. So I personally don't know any ultra marathoners, and I don't really know what their profile is, but knowing how body works and how food helps fuel the body for particular exercises, that's the way they would probably do it, and that's how I would do it if I was an endurance athlete. So I just thought I'd show you that as a little bit of interest, just to show you how different it can be, and how when you get to this elite level, your nutrition needs change quite significantly.